Hello. Boy's voice was barely louder than a whisper, but somehow it cut through the noise of the crowded airport like a warning siren. A billionaire who controlled companies worth billions of dollars stopped in his tracks. The homeless child standing near the terminal entrance looked exhausted, hungry, and forgotten by the world. His clothes were worn. His sneakers were falling apart. Yet his eyes carried a strange urgency. The boy stared directly at the businessman and said something that would change both of their lives forever. "Don't get on that plane." What happened next stunned everyone. Before we begin, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire if you believe kindness and second chances can change lives. Your support helps bring more emotional stories like this to people around the world. The morning sun poured through the massive glass walls of Hawthorne International Airport, painting golden reflections across polished floors and busy travelers rushing toward their gates. It was the kind of bright day that seemed full of promise. Graham Mercer moved quickly through the crowd. At 42 years old, he was one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the country. Financial magazines called him a genius. Investors called him unstoppable. Employees called him demanding but fair. But none of those titles mattered to him anymore. The only title he truly cared about was father. 3 years earlier, his wife had passed away after a sudden illness, leaving him alone to raise his 10-year-old daughter, Nora. Every success after that loss felt empty. Every business victory was followed by another lonely evening at home. Every award sat on a shelf collecting dust while he struggled to be both mother and father to the little girl who depended on him. That morning, Graham was scheduled to board a flight to Seattle for the most important business merger of his career. The deal could add another $1 billion to his company. Investors were waiting. Lawyers were waiting. Executives were waiting. And yet all he could think about was the disappointed look on Nora's face when he left home before sunrise. She had asked him if he could stay for her school presentation. Once again, work had won. As Graham approached the security checkpoint, he noticed the small boy sitting near a concrete pillar outside the terminal. Most people walked past without looking. Some glanced briefly before turning away. Others acted as though he didn't exist. The boy couldn't have been older than 11. His dark hair was messy. His backpack looked torn. A cardboard sign rested beside him, though he wasn't asking for money. Instead, he seemed focused entirely on Graham. When their eyes met, the boy stood up immediately. Something about the child's expression made Graham slow down. The boy approached carefully. Then came the warning. "Don't get on that plane." Graham frowned. For a moment, he assumed the child was confused. Perhaps he mistook him for someone else. But the boy's face remained serious. There was fear there. Real fear. Not the kind children invent during games. The kind that comes from experience. Graham looked around. Travelers continued moving. Airport announcements echoed overhead. Everything appeared normal. Yet he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling settling in his chest. The boy looked exhausted. Not dangerous. Not unstable. Just deeply worried. Graham surprised himself by asking why. The child hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the runway visible through distant windows. Then he explained that he had dreamed about the plane all night. He admitted it sounded ridiculous. People laughed at him whenever he mentioned it. But he had seen something terrible. Something that left him shaking when he woke up. Most adults would have walked away immediately. Graham almost did. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was because he saw his daughter in the boy's eyes. Perhaps it was because grief had taught him that life was fragile. Or perhaps it was simply intuition. Whatever the reason, he couldn't ignore the child. Instead of dismissing him, Graham invited him inside for breakfast. The boy looked shocked. As if kindness was something rare. As if he wasn't used to being treated like a human being. They sat together at a small cafe overlooking the runway. The boy introduced himself as Kieran Vale. Over pancakes and hot chocolate, his story slowly emerged. His mother had died the previous winter. His father had disappeared years earlier. After bouncing between shelters and temporary homes, Kieran eventually found himself alone. The system had failed him. Adults had failed him. Life had failed him. Yet despite everything, he remained polite. Hopeful. Gentle. The more Graham listened, the heavier his heart became. He thought about Nora. What if circumstances had been different? What if his daughter had faced the world alone? The thought was unbearable. Minutes passed, then an hour. Soon boarding time approached. Graham checked his watch repeatedly. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages from executives waiting for him. The merger meeting couldn't be delayed. Everything depended on his attendance. Yet every time he prepared to stand, he noticed Kieran's worried expression. The boy genuinely believed something bad would happen. Finally, Graham made an unexpected decision. He called his executive team. The announcement left them speechless. He wasn't boarding. The meeting would have to proceed virtually. Investors complained. Lawyers protested. Partners panicked. But for the first time in years, Graham ignored them all. The flight departed without him. Kieran visibly relaxed. For a brief moment, Graham wondered whether he had made a foolish mistake. Then chaos erupted. Just 40 minutes after the plane left, emergency alerts flashed throughout the airport. Air traffic operations halted immediately. Authorities began clearing terminals. Confused passengers crowded around information screens. Airport staff rushed through corridors. Within minutes, every departure was suspended. The airport shut down completely. Reports spread rapidly. A serious security threat had been discovered involving multiple transportation systems across the region. Flights were diverted. Airports closed. Law enforcement launched a massive investigation. News helicopters filled the sky. Travel schedules collapsed nationwide. The flight Graham had been scheduled to board was redirected to another city for emergency inspection. No passengers were harmed. No disaster occurred. But the threat was real. Very real. As travelers reacted with shock and frustration, Graham sat frozen in the cafe. A chill traveled down his spine. Kieran stared silently through the window. Neither knew what to say. The timing was impossible to ignore. The warning. The delay. The shutdown. The flight diversion. Logic struggled to explain it. Yet there they were. Together. Safe. For the rest of the afternoon, Graham stayed with Kieran. The airport remained closed. News coverage intensified. And during those unexpected hours, something remarkable happened. Two strangers began forming a bond. Kieran spoke about the books he loved reading at public libraries. He shared his dream of becoming an engineer someday. He talked about designing bridges and buildings. Graham listened carefully. The boy was brilliant. Not just intelligent. Exceptionally gifted. His circumstances had hidden his potential from the world. But the potential was there. Waiting. By evening, the airport shutdown remained in effect. Graham knew he couldn't simply walk away. Not after everything he had learned. Not after seeing how vulnerable the boy truly was. So he contacted child welfare services and several organizations he trusted. He spent hours ensuring Kieran would have a safe place to stay. For the first time in months, the boy smiled. It was a small smile, but it carried enormous meaning. Someone cared. Someone was fighting for him. Someone saw him. Over the following weeks, Graham couldn't stop thinking about Kieran. The image of that lonely child at the airport stayed with him. He visited regularly. He checked on his progress. He learned more about the obstacles Kieran faced. Eventually, what began as concern transformed into something deeper. Responsibility. Connection. Family. Nora met Kieran during one of those visits. The two became friends almost immediately. They bonded over books, science projects, and endless curiosity. For the first time since losing her mother, Nora laughed the way she used to. The sound brought tears to Graham's eyes. Months later, after countless meetings, evaluations, and legal procedures, Graham made a life-changing decision. He opened his home. He opened his heart. And he gave Kieran something he hadn't experienced in years. A family. The day Kieran moved into the Mercer household, he stood quietly in his new bedroom staring at the bed, the desk, the lamp, the shelves, the simple comforts most children take for granted. Then he cried. Not because he was sad, because he finally felt safe. Years passed. The airport incident became a distant memory. Investigators eventually concluded that the shutdown had prevented a potentially catastrophic situation from escalating. Lives been protected. Disaster had been avoided. Whether Kieran's warning was coincidence, intuition, or something greater remained a mystery. But Graham never forgot it. Neither did Nora. Neither did Kieran. The boy who once slept in shelters eventually graduated at the top of his class. He earned scholarships. He pursued engineering. And he dedicated much of his time helping homeless youth find opportunities they desperately needed. The child who had once been invisible became a beacon of hope for others. One bright afternoon many years later, Graham watched Kieran address a crowd at the opening of a new community center built specifically for vulnerable children. As applause filled the air, Graham realized something extraordinary. He had spent his entire career believing success came from building companies. But his greatest achievement wasn't a business. It wasn't a merger. It wasn't a billion-dollar deal. It was stopping long enough to listen to a forgotten child. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire. Stories like these remind us that one act of kindness can completely change a life. Special request, comment below with the words "Kindness changes everything" if you believe every child deserves to be seen, heard, and loved. As the sun set behind the community center, 3 people stood together watching children laugh and play. A billionaire who had been consumed by work, a daughter who had found joy again, and a homeless boy whose warning at an airport changed all of their lives forever. Sometimes the most important voices are the ones the world ignores. Sometimes miracles arrive wearing torn shoes. And sometimes the greatest blessing in life comes from simply stopping long enough to listen.